The whole world knew her smile, but almost no one knew how many tears hid behind every frame where she laughed. Marilyn Monroe, the woman who became the symbol of desire for millions, yet the loneliest star in Hollywood. She only dreamed of being loved, but instead became a legend who, even after death, continues to haunt historians, filmmakers, and fans. She was always hungry, for attention, for love, for life. She fed with her eyes, her soul, her heart, because all her life she was afraid of being left without warmth, without dinner, without meaning. We will tell you her story, without glamour, without lies, without filters. From a hungry childhood, where a bowl of soup felt like a holiday, to the dazzling lights of Hollywood, where every dinner could cost too much. We will show how an ordinary girl named Norma Jeane became the woman whose name turned into a symbol of seduction, yet deep inside, she remained a fragile child longing for affection. You're about to hear 10 revealing stories, each exposing what producers, husbands, and even biographers tried to hide. Why she used a hairdryer instead of a pot, why she converted her faith, who truly loved her and who only used her, why her laughter was not joy, but protection. And in the 10th part, we will unveil one fact that will turn everything you thought you knew about Marilyn Monroe upside down, a fact that was hidden long after her death. Watch till the end, because this secret will forever change the way you look at the smile of the most mysterious woman in the history of cinema. Part 1. Always hungry. She was a child who learned to swallow not only food but also pain. Little Norma Jeane grew up with the feeling that the world was always taking something away from her. Her childhood smelled of cheap soap, cold milk, and empty plates. When her mother brought home leftovers from the film studio where she worked as a cutter, it felt like a feast. A piece of bread, a bit of butter, a rare slice of apple, all of it was a celebration. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, worked hard but couldn't cope with reality. She saw faces and shadows, convinced that someone was watching her from behind every corner. Norma grew up surrounded by silence, anxiety, and a hunger that never ended, even after dinner. When her mother finally broke down, the girl was sent to the Bolender family, strict, devout, but fair people. There one couldn't laugh loudly, couldn't dance, couldn't dream about the movies. But one could eat one's fill, and for Norma that meant more than anything. For the first time, she knew what it was to feel full, but along with it came a sense of debt. From then on, she ate everything placed in front of her, never leaving a crumb, as if afraid the food might be taken away tomorrow. That fear never left her. Later, as an adult, she admitted she couldn't stand seeing anyone leave food on a plate. Her hunger became a symbol, not just for bread, but for affection, warmth, love, and recognition. It shaped her body, her walk, her smile. Even in photographs where she laughs, you can see the gaze of someone still waiting for something. Hunger made her alive. It pushed her to act, to fight, to seduce, but it also haunted her, making her consume emotions, men, fame, and still remain empty. As a child, she fell asleep dreaming of hot sandwiches and fried potatoes. As a woman, she dreamed that someone would simply tell her, "You are not alone. I am here." Norma Jeane learned to smile even when her stomach twisted with pain. And perhaps that is why her smile became the most famous in the world, because behind it was not joy, but an
Our
endless
Father,
battle with
who art in
emptiness.
heaven,
When Norma
hallowed be
Jeane
thy
turned
name.
16,
Thy
her
kingdom
world
come,
began to
thy
crumble
will be
again.
done on earth
Her
as it
foster
is in
family was
heaven.
moving away, which meant the girl would be sent back to an orphanage. That fear was worse than hunger, worse than cold, worse than loneliness. She already knew what it felt like to be passed from hand to hand like something no one wanted anymore. To avoid the orphanage, she made a desperate choice. Her neighbor, a 20-year-old boy named Jim Dougherty, offered to marry her, and she agreed. Not out of love, not out of romance, but out of fear. She didn't choose a husband, she chose safety. Marriage seemed like salvation, but it became another cage. Jim was a good man, honest and hardworking, but he had no idea who lived beside him. He saw a sweet, naive girl who should cook, clean, iron, and greet him with dinner. Norma could do none of it. She mixed up salt and sugar, burned the eggs, even ruined tea. She laughed at herself, but inside she felt ashamed. She thought she was failing again, not good enough once more. When Jim was sent to serve in the Navy, she was left alone, for the first time in a long time. truly alone. And that was when she was first photographed. It happened by accident, almost like fate. A military photographer came to the airplane factory where she worked, and among hundreds of women, he noticed her. The light, the smile, the eyes, everything aligned in that 1 second. Those photos changed her life. After they were published, Norma was offered a chance to try modeling. She didn't know how to pose, how to look, how to move. But she had something that couldn't be taught: inner strength, magnetism, vulnerability. She stood before the camera as if facing a mirror, and for the first time, she wasn't pretending. The photos brought success, and with it came a new name. That was the birth of Marilyn Monroe. She chose it herself, Marilyn after an actress she once saw on screen, and Monroe after her mother's maiden name. A name where her dream and her pain merged. When Jim returned, he didn't recognize his wife.
Thank you so much.
Before him stood a woman who no longer wanted to be just a housewife. She no longer needed a savior. She had found her power, in front of the camera, in front of the lens, in front of the world. And though many falls awaited her ahead, it was in that moment that the legend was born. The girl who was afraid of being unwanted finally realized she could become anyone she wanted to be. Part 3. The girl who ate fame to survive the emptiness. When her photos began appearing in magazines, Norma Jeane ceased to exist. In her place, Marilyn Monroe was born, a woman whose name became synonymous with desire, sin, and beauty. She entered Hollywood not as a guest, but as a storm. Yet that storm began quietly. At first, there were commercial shoots, smiles, carefree poses, then tiny film roles where her name didn't even appear in the credits. Her glow was noticed, but no one took her seriously. Men saw a body. Women saw a threat. She was invited to parties, promised fame, offered roles, but every promise had a price. Sometimes dinner turned into a transaction and a compliment into a trap. She smiled and agreed because she knew that if she didn't, the door would close. Hollywood fed her with attention, but that attention was poison. She swallowed it to survive, to prove she could become more than just a pretty picture. During that time, she posed for covers, wore swimsuits, even undressed for photographs, not because she wanted to, but because she had to pay for rent and food. Her calendar photos spread across the country, and those very scandalous, daring images made her famous. Yet few knew that when a journalist asked if she felt ashamed posing without clothes, she replied, "Why should I? I had nothing to wear." The line became legendary, but it was the truth. She wasn't acting. She was surviving. Her hunger returned, but now it was a hunger for fame. She devoured applause like it was oxygen. Every gaze, every flash, every headline became her nourishment. She ate fame to keep from dying of emptiness. And the more people adored her, the lonelier she became. She tried to fit the dream, dyed her hair platinum, learned to speak slowly and breathily, to move softly, to laugh gently. She was sculpting herself into a fantasy, a woman who had no right to age, tire, or feel sad. Her eyes shone not with joy, but with hope that love would arrive with success. But Hollywood does not love. It only pretends. Still, she refused to give up. Every morning she woke with the thought that she had to be better, prettier, more wanted. She feared only one thing, that one day no one would look at her. Because then the emptiness would return, the cold would return, and the hunger would begin again, not for food, but for attention, admiration, warmth. Thus, Marilyn Monroe was born, a woman who learned to live from gaze to gaze, from flash to flash, from kiss to kiss. Part 4. The woman who learned to be herself among other people's roles. When the whole world finally knew her name, Marilyn realized that fame wasn't freedom. It was just another kind of prison. She could charm anyone, but more and more she felt surrounded by scenery instead of people. Her laughter became her armor, and her body, a tool to attract attention. Yet behind the perfect curls and the dazzling smile hid exhaustion. She didn't want to just act. She wanted to feel, to breathe in every frame, to be not a doll but a human being. Hollywood kept offering her light-hearted roles, silly, seductive blondes. She accepted them because she had no choice, but deep inside, she felt hungry, not for fame,
in a quiet voice,
but for meaning. She wanted to be heard not only with the eyes, but with the heart. So she made a decision to study. She enrolled in the famous actor's studio in New York, where Lee Strasberg taught his method. There, no one believed in masks. They taught you to feel pain and live it through every line. She sat quietly in class, without makeup, wearing simple clothes, listening to others perform, and for the first time in years, she felt unseen in the best way. In that room, she became Norma Jeane again, alive, fragile, real. She learned to cry again, to laugh again, to look not as a star, but as a human. Many mocked her, saying, "What could a blonde know about drama?" But when she stepped on stage and spoke her first lines, the room went silent. Her voice trembled, but it carried such truth that no one dared look away. In that moment, Marilyn understood that acting wasn't performance. It was confession. She stopped being a character and became herself. But Hollywood didn't want Marilyn with a soul. Hollywood wanted Marilyn the dream. She grew tired of a world that adored her looks but feared her depth. Around that time, she founded her own production company, a bold move for a woman of her era. She wanted to choose her roles, to decide who she would become. She refused to be just decoration on the screen. She wanted her films to mean something. And so a new Marilyn was born, smart, defiant, and demanding. She no longer accepted cheap comedies. She searched for scripts that would let her show the emotions she had long kept hidden. Her eyes still sparkled, but now it was not the shine of seduction. It was the reflection of inner fire. She wasn't acting anymore. She was living. Part 5. A love that smelled of spaghetti and disappointment. When she met Joe DiMaggio, her life already felt like a perfectly scripted movie where every frame had to be flawless. He was a baseball legend, calm, composed, disciplined, a man of steel will and traditional values. She was a whirlwind, a light, a chaos, a woman whose whole life was a desperate attempt to be loved. Their meeting was like the clash of two elements. Joe was fascinated by her but never understood her world. He wanted a modest wife, a homemaker, a woman who greeted him with dinner and smiled quietly at the family table. But Marilyn wanted to be real, free, alive. She tried, truly tried, for him, for the feeling that seemed genuine for the first time. She tried cooking, learning Italian dishes because she knew how much Joe missed home. Once, she decided to make pasta by hand. The recipe didn't say how to dry the noodles, so she grabbed a hairdryer and started drying the dough right in the kitchen until the pieces flew all over the room. She laughed, and Joe watched her with sadness, realizing she would never be the proper wife he imagined. But in that ridiculous moment, with flour in her hair and laughter in her eyes, she was more real than ever. They were a beautiful couple, but far too different. He was jealous of the cameras, of the attention, of the world that kept taking her away. Every public appearance became a trial. When all of New York froze, watching her white dress lift above the subway grate, Joe didn't see art, he saw humiliation. For Marilyn, it was just a moment, a playful scene. For him, it was betrayal. After that came silence, then arguments, then distance. He wanted peace, she wanted freedom, he wanted stillness, she needed applause. Their love never vanished. It simply became heavy, like a stone tied to both their hearts. After the divorce, Joe kept calling her, writing to her, showing up quietly, standing in the background, watching as she drowned in the world that had built her. He remained one of the few who truly loved her, without fame, without makeup, without light. They say that after her death, he ordered flowers for her grave every single week. He never remarried. And perhaps somewhere deep inside, she knew that he was the one man who had loved not Marilyn Monroe, but Norma Jeane, the girl who once just wanted to make spaghetti and didn't know how to do it right. Part 6. The woman who searched for God and lost herself. After years of fame, love, and scandal, Marilyn once again longed to start over. For the first time, she believed she could find meaning not in applause, not in passion, not in other people's eyes, but in something deeper. When she met Arthur Miller, her world turned upside down again. He was unlike anyone she had known before, quiet, intelligent, reflective, a man whose words could both wound and heal. He didn't worship her looks, he listened. For Marilyn, that was something new, almost unreal. He saw not a symbol, but a soul. She was drawn to him like a moth to light. For him, she left behind Hollywood, moved to New York, and lived among writers and playwrights who never called her a dumb blonde. For the first time, she felt like a woman to be proud of, not a fantasy to be consumed. Miller wrote plays, and she read them, debated, suggested changes, inspired him. She even changed her faith, converted to Judaism, to be closer to him, to his world, to his truth. She believed they could build something lasting, something real. But the dream didn't last. The harder she tried to be perfect, the further he drifted away. He didn't know how to live beside a woman adored by the entire world. Her fame overshadowed him, her light blinded him. He wanted peace. She still craved love. Marilyn felt herself slipping away, again. She stopped laughing, stopped believing in her roles, stopped tasting life. On the outside, they looked perfect, the intellectual playwright and the Hollywood goddess, but inside, everything was falling apart. Miller wrote a play called After the Fall, where the heroine resembled her, broken, lifeless. It was betrayal turned into art. When she discovered he had written in his journal that she was a disappointment, she cried the entire night. In that moment, everything she believed in shattered. She had sought meaning and found loss. After that, Marilyn began to fade. Pills, sleepless nights, anxiety, loneliness, all of it returned. She started searching for God again, but not in religion, in silence. Sometimes she sat by the window watching the sunset, whispering, "I'm still here." She wanted to believe that the light still heard her, that somewhere beyond fame and pain there was a place where she could simply be herself, not a role, not an image, not a legend, but a woman who still knew how to dream. Part 7. The Voice That Carried Pain. Everyone knew her voice. That soft, breathy tone became her signature, seductive, unforgettable, seemingly made for love songs and sighs. But few understood that this voice was not a gift, it was a scar. As a child, Norma Jeane stuttered. Every word came through fear, through a clenched throat, through the shame of being imperfect. She was afraid to speak, afraid people would laugh, afraid they would hear the trembling inside her. Later, she learned to hide it. She found a way. She began to speak slowly, stretching her phrases, turning every word into a whisper. That was how the famous Marilyn Monroe voice was born, a sound millions found sensual. But for her, it was survival. She had turned her weakness into a weapon. Her breath became her rhythm, her softness, her shield. Yet inside, she knew that voice belonged to a frightened girl, still afraid to speak too loudly. Sometimes on set, the stutter returned. Directors grew impatient. She blushed, apologized, felt guilty for not being flawless. She hated those pauses, but she never gave up. After takes, she would lock herself in her dressing room and repeat her lines over and over until she could say them again without faltering. She was fighting not just the stutter, but the silence that gave birth to it. Over the years, that voice became a legend, but behind it always lingered fragility. People heard her and thought she was acting, but she was only trying not to fall apart. Her whisper was a prayer, not to the audience, but to herself. In every word, there was, "I can, I won't break, I'm still here." When she sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," millions admired her boldness, but no one heard the trembling in her breath, the struggle between fear and strength inside every syllable. That voice wasn't decoration. It was her armor. It was proof that even the wounded can sound beautiful, that weakness can be turned into art, that pain can become music. And perhaps that's why her softest words still echo louder than others' shouts, because they carried truth, and because she learned how to turn pain into song. Part 8. The Woman Who Grew Tired of Being Eternal. By the early 1960s, Marilyn was no longer just an actress, she was a myth. People stopped seeing her as a person. They called her a goddess, an icon of beauty, a dream. But no one asked what it felt like to be a dream when you can't wake up from it. Her life had become a glittering window display, and behind the glass stood the same Norma Jeane, tired, lost, and alone. She began breaking down more often, arriving late to sets, unable to sleep without pills or wake up without them. The body that had been worshipped by millions began to betray her, insomnia, headaches, anxiety. She lived surrounded by assistants, doctors, and managers who gave her everything except silence. Her inner voice drowned in the noise of fame. Hollywood, the same machine that created her, had started to grow tired of her. Studios complained about her unreliability, the press mocked her lateness, colleagues whispered that she was broken, but no one saw that behind it was a woman who had simply run out of strength. During the filming of Something's Got to Give, she was fired, accused of unprofessionalism and chaos, yet no one noticed she was fighting just to stay standing. On set, she smiled, pretending everything was fine, but in her dressing room, she sat in silence, staring into the mirror as if trying to remember who she was. She often said, "I'm not Marilyn. She is Marilyn. I just try to live beside her." She was exhausted from being a myth. Her life no longer belonged to her. Every gesture, every glance, every breath was watched, recorded, sold. She feared even her own shadow because it, too, seemed to belong to someone else. In those years, Marilyn began writing notes, diary entries, letters to herself. There was no glamour in them, only fatigue and longing. She wrote that she felt like a bird in a golden cage whose wings no longer remembered how to fly. And yet she still hoped. Sometimes, early in the morning, she would open the curtains, let the sunlight fall across her face, and smile. Not for the camera, not for the world, but for herself. Those were the only real moments left. In them, there was no Marilyn Monroe. There was only Norma Jeane, who still believed that light could be kind. Part 9. The Last Night and the Silence That Never Ended. On August 5, 1962, the world froze. That morning, newspapers ran headlines that made hearts stop. Marilyn Monroe was dead. She was 36. In her Brentwood home, the lights were still on, and the bedroom door was locked from the inside. When they found her, she was lying on the bed, clutching a phone in her hand, as if she'd been trying to reach someone who could save her. Empty pill bottles stood on the bedside table. The room was silent. The official cause, overdose of barbiturates, probable suicide. But the more time passed, the fewer people believed that simple version. Too many odd details, too many secrets. Phone records allegedly erased, witnesses who later disappeared, signs the house had been cleaned before police arrived. Some said she was murdered. Others claimed she knew too much. Whispers spread of affairs with President John Kennedy, of secret meetings, of letters that vanished. Rumors said she called Robert Kennedy that night, screaming that she could no longer live in a world where she was used. Some swore he was in Los Angeles. Others said they saw a black car outside her home. The truth dissolved into speculation, and the more people talked, the darker the shadow grew. Her death became a reflection of her life, beautiful, tragic, misunderstood. Even in dying, she remained an enigma. At her funeral, Joe DiMaggio stood silent, saying nothing. A week later, he ordered flowers to be placed on her grave every week for the next 20 years. Hollywood wept, but deep down it knew it had destroyed her. The cameras, the contracts, the endless chase for perfection, they had consumed her. And yet, when the world said goodbye, it felt as if she were merely asleep, about to open her eyes and smile again. Because Marilyn could not simply vanish. She had burned too brightly to ever be extinguished. Maybe she was tired of living, but she never stopped being eternal. The silence that followed her death wasn't an ending. It was an echo. And in that echo, even now, her voice can still be heard, whispering, "I'm still here." And here it is, the promised bonus, the very moment that made it worth watching the story to the end. Marilyn Monroe, the embodiment of passion and glamour, in reality lived a life completely different from the one shown in magazines. She adored books and could read for hours, sitting on the floor while the soft light of a lamp glowed nearby. In her personal library, there were more than 400 books, from the poetry of Rilke to the philosophy of Nietzsche, and she often said that words nourished her better than the most expensive dinners. Few people know that Marilyn stuttered, and her famous sultry voice was born not out of flirtation, but out of pain, as she tried to control her breathing to keep from slipping into the sounds her childhood had taught her to be ashamed of. Another rare fact is that she sometimes went out under a different name, Zelda Zonk, wearing a wig and huge sunglasses just to feel, for a little while, like an ordinary person without guards, without flashes, without anyone's expectations. She was also the second woman in Hollywood history to found her own production company, so she could decide which roles to play and stop being a toy in the hands of the studios. And she left behind hundreds of letters and notes in which she reflected on life, death, and loneliness, writing with astonishing honesty, as if she somehow knew that one day people would read them and realize that behind the image of the most desired woman in the world was a girl who simply wanted, at last, to be heard.